Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by The Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. Today's guest is someone that is new to the podcast, and in fact, pretty new to the Art of Ed, but I'm sure that you are going to love him. It is Ray Yang, the newest writer on the AOE team. Ray had an awesome first month of articles in November, writing about how to enact change with your students, how to teach students to fail spectacularly, and how to use reflection to help students understand and develop their creative process. You know, people were reading these articles and actually started to bug me. A bunch of emails and a few tweets say, "Who's this Ray Yang? When are you going to have him on the podcast?" And luckily he was willing to come on to talk about a lot of his ideas. And we've got a ton to talk about. He's got some huge, great ideas, and I'm going to bring him on in a quick second. But I want you to listen for something when we talk here. Ray is excellent about breaking down both the big picture and the small-scale logistics of things. So when we're talking about, say, reflection, for example, I'm hoping that he can talk about the big picture reasons we need to encourage our students to reflect, but also the specific ways in which we can do it in our classroom and how we can be successful with it. So we'll talk reflection and risk-taking and creativity, and even how and why we need to advocate for ourselves as art teachers. I also want to give Ray a chance to talk about all the cool things he's done throughout his career. So let me bring him on right now and get the conversation started. And Ray Yang is here with us. Ray, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Tim.
Good. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. And I think people have been really excited to read all of your articles. And I know that readers always like to know about whose articles they're reading. So can you take a second to just tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, your teaching, or maybe a little bit about what you like to do outside of school? Just let people get to know you a little more.
Sure, absolutely. So I actually grew up on the East Coast. I'm from New York, originally Long Island. Always knew I wanted to be doing something in the arts, but wasn't ever sure what. Wasn't a big, wasn't a real popular thing with my parents. They weren't really excited about this, but actually double majored. I did a degree in both biology and studio art. Trying to figure out, I think as a lot of people do after college, what I wanted to do. I went and actually worked for a magazine and did production work, did like graphic design, did that for about a year and just really was not excited about it. And so I went back to school. I went to the Art Institute and in Chicago and got my master's in art education. And that really kind of, I think, set me on that track for where I am now. I've worked in a lot of different types of organizations. I worked for a history museum where I was running their teen programs, and I had a group of 15 teens who worked on oral history projects with me. I kind of refer to them as my first kids.
Okay.
And, and they're all actually in their mid to late 20s now. So that was a while ago. And then I worked for a community art center called the Hyde Park Art Center and ran the outreach programs there for quite a while before going on to work for the district in Chicago. So I worked for Chicago Public Schools in the central office. I worked as an administrator, helping to run visual arts programming for the whole district. And it was a move to kind of help have more impact across the district because there's 400,000 kids, about 650 schools in CPS.
Yeah.
And it was really cool for a couple of years, but it's also really exhausting. And it was a job that, I think you get a lot of burnout with. I was also teaching grad school classes at the Art Institute at that time. And so after about 15 years in Chicago, my family and I, we decided that we needed a change. And so we moved to Seattle. And so we came out here about 2.5 years ago. I was working as a consultant with Seattle Public Schools, helping to do some assessment and curriculum writing, working as a teaching artist. And at that point, I realized what I was really missing was working directly with kids. And so I had an opportunity to take a job in a classroom, and so went back into a classroom and I'm an art teacher again now, and it's exciting, and I love doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have just a ton of experience there, which I think is really cool. I love the ideas in your first article. Your debut article was called How to Teach Students to Fail Spectacularly. And it talked a lot about getting kids past the idea of there being one right answer. But can you explain kind of what you do in your classroom to get kids past that mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I try to do is really create a space that's comfortable and safe for them to experiment. And I do that through a bunch of different ways. On based on just my projects alone, I try to start them off with projects that don't have right answers. So I think in the article I mentioned that we'll do things like blind contour portraits, right? So the goal is it's not supposed to necessarily look like the person, right? And students have this really it's funny when you're in the project with them, you're watching them. They all want to look so bad, They all because they all want to get it right, and it's this idea I think that's been kind of really hammered into them throughout school that there is a right answer for things always, right? They take tests and there are right answers. They do homework sheets and worksheets and things, and there are correct answers, and they get graded, and they get the right answer back, and they receive praise for that. They don't they don't get praise for screwing up and then fixing it, and
Right.
kind of pushing through challenges. They don't get praise for or they don't get reinforcement around wow, that's a really difficult thing and it didn't work. Now let's kind of take a look at that and figure out how we can make it work. And so I think it's about creating a space where they're going to feel comfortable. I try to really get to know the kids too, and really start to understand what I can push with them and what can't, because I think some kids are ready. They've been waiting for this class, to be able to just open the floodgates and really, and just try and experiment. Other kids, it's a real challenge, and so you kind of have to move, I think, a little more slowly with them, and through repetition, through lots of opportunities where you show them that if it doesn't work out, that it's okay. That I was just having a conversation with a student about this, that she was really tentative with her paint. Like, she was working with paint for the first time. Really, she's has really strong drawing skills. It was like, she would just do a little bit and ask me to come over and take a look and ask me, how does this look? And, we eventually got to the point in this conversation. I was like, what's the worst thing that happens if this doesn't go well? If you feel like, it's not working? She's like, I don't know. I was like, we'll start again. And she kind of had this, that's okay. Of that's all right. I was like, yeah, we'll start again. And you've done thousands of drawings in your life, and not all of them have always gone well, but you were able to start again, and we'll do that with this. And she, I think it was kind of freeing for her to be able to say, I can start over if it doesn't work. So yeah, so I think that's, it's really about creating a space where they're going to be comfortable and building in that culture of it's all right to mess up, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, and I think that transitions really well into something else I wanted to ask you, because you also give some specific suggestions for encouraging risk taking in your classroom, including what you said, creating a culture of yes and having an ongoing dialogue with kids as they work, which is, something you just gave a great example of right there. But can you also talk a little bit about other ways you kind of empower kids in your classroom?
Sure. I try not to be too hands-on with them. I think one of the things I've learned in my teaching career is that, as I've gotten more experience, I've become more comfortable with stepping away and letting them sort of figure things out. I was joking to someone else in my department that I feel like, if you look at my teaching now versus when I first started working as a teaching artist in the classroom and stuff, you feel like I'm probably lazier now because it looks like I'm doing less. I used to be this ball of energy, running around, making sure everyone's on top of things, and now I really start to step further and further away, because I think I try to set things up on the front end with the projects and reflection questions and other things that are built into the projects, and so I try to not be too didactic with things. So as they're working through a challenge or a project, I'll talk with them, but my goal is not to give them the answer, right? Like I might know what technique will work in a specific instance to solve the issue they're working with. I might know what material or what they need to do, like as they're talking about like trying to figure out how they want to approach a question, or I'd like to frame it as like a visual problem or a visual challenge for them. But I don't want to give it to them, right? And I want them to feel like they have ownership over that and that they're figuring this out. And so so I really try to kind of step away. I also try not to, you mentioned that this idea of the culture of yes, and so along those lines, like I try not to say no to a lot of things. We were just doing a project where we were working on value and color, and we're using torn paper to create this portrait. There's a lot of construction paper out on the table. That's what I was providing them and letting them use. And a kid came to me and said, can I try these different kinds of, like they had gone to the closet and found all sorts of different types of paper, and like I laid out something, but they were like, I found this other material, or they actually found some like aluminum foil and stuff they wanted to use too. And so I feel like that I would have had an instinct in the past to say, no, we're going to use the paper that's out here. But instead, now I'm trying to say to them, well, tell me why you want to use this. Explain to me what you're thinking. And they did. They were really thinking about light and reflecting, off of that shiny surface of the aluminum foil. I was like, all right, let's give it a try. And so I'm really trying to like give them that ownership to, not say no too often, because I think they probably get that a lot in a lot of other classes too. Coming up to teacher and saying, I want to try something different, or I want to do something else. The answer is often no, and for really good reason. I think in some classrooms, like in the science lab, maybe no, you can't use those other chemicals, or like no, you can't, flip the Bunsen burner upside, whatever it might be. There are really good reasons for that, but I think in my space we can experiment a little more. So trying to say no less often.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think giving kids that ability to kind of try something out, something different with the process is huge, when we're talking creativity and when we're talking about getting them to appreciate the process. And actually, that takes me into my next question, too. You wrote a great article on reflection and the creative process. And can you talk a little bit about how you build reflection time into your classroom, what that looks like in your classroom, and what you want kids to get out of, that focus on the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's for me, that's huge. I have started to, I think part of my job is always about teaching students about materials and techniques and learning different things that they haven't tried before. But I also think a big part of every art teacher's job is actually teaching students how to think and how to reflect. And how to engage with the creative process. It's something that carries over, I think, into every single subject area, into in all parts of life. Is like being able to reflect and think about how you're impacting, changing, shifting things, and so it's vital and it's so important to me. So in the classroom, it's hard though, right? Because we have so much we want to get done. There's just so many projects that we are trying to do, and I definitely recognize I'm super privileged in terms of my classroom and my school, where I don't have a ton of oversight telling me like these are the things you have to do or these are projects you do, and that I work at an independent school. It's pretty well resourced, and I've worked with a ton of public school teachers. When I was working as an administrator for the central office in Chicago, and so I know how many demands are put on them, and also how little time they get with kids. So, how do you build in time, to be able to reflect when it feels like you're just trying to get the projects done? And so, different things. Some stuff that I mentioned in the article, stuff like exit slips, right? Just short, like 2-question prompts that like get them to think about it. Think about what they've just done that day. I usually do them weekly with them, and the questions are most frequently it's something like what was something you were successful at today, or I'll say like what is something you were awesome at today, And then the other one being, what was something that you had a challenge with, or what was something that was an obstacle for you in class today? I think it's really great that the more you do it, you see that kids really start to embrace this as a moment to be able to like have some say in what's happening in class. And they'll tell me like, I felt super rushed today. I'm just not getting this project done, and I need more time. And that helps me too, right? In terms of like managing the class. I try to build in reflection and thinking about the process right from the very start. So the first thing I do with all my projects now is I have kids start to think about those questions. We spend about 10 minutes or so talking about that at the start and emphasize that these are questions I want you to consider all the way through this project. And at the end, for my class, they'll always do a short reflection as well. So like, writing like a short paragraph, just tell me, I'll have a series of prompts specific to the project and asking them to let me know, like, what did you think of this? Like, how did you change your piece based on whatever it is, and that's another moment, right? It's really, I think, that relationship you build with a student during the class, encouraging them to step back from the work. I think that helps them to also see the process. They get, really tunnel vision sometimes on working on what's right in front of them, that we don't take breaks and moments. And so like literally, like, it's like, everyone take a step back, take a look at what you're working on right now. Take a walk around, see what other people are doing. My school, kids have iPads, and so I take full advantage of that. We don't take pictures of their work just at the end. They take pictures of the work throughout, so they can see how it's progressed and where where it changed. And then I always ask them to kind of look back on their work too and say, like, we'll look at it together. Be like, look, do you see how, like, you worked on this one section of this drawing, and like, you're really able to develop all the value, and it's so much stronger now than, and do you remember how you felt? You were really down about it at that moment, So I try to build it in all over the place, and some of it works better than others. Some of the approaches, but I really, I think it's so important, and I really want my students to be thinking about that all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a good big picture view for the kids and for you as well. And I would encourage everybody to kind of reflect on that and think about, how we are teaching kids about our process. And then just a couple last questions for you. First, yesterday's article was all about, how we aren't here as teachers to make posters and make bulletin boards. And I think Andrew and I recorded an entire episode about how to say no before. And this whole idea of what we should be doing and what we should stand up for as art teachers is something that people are passionate about. But can you explain, why you wanted to write this article and give us kind of a quick rundown of what's in it?
Yeah, sure. I think every teacher, not just art teachers, like, we're constantly being asked to do extra things, right? Things that aren't like that,
Mm-hmm.
things that come under the other duties as needed, right?
Yes.
I think teachers especially, it's not just about the teaching, right? A lot of people talk about their job and it's just this, but it's also about, like, for us, like, we have our own professional development we're trying to maintain. We are, lesson planning, doing assessments. There's maybe curriculum writing. We're probably on a couple committees, right, at the school. Maybe a committee about, like, school, taking care of the environment of the school. Maybe it's something about, like, social justice, and there's always additional work that needs to be done, because I think we all also care about the school, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and so, like, how do you balance all those things, and also, like, recognize that, like, our teachers are often looked to do just kind of one level of stuff, like, it's like, hey, the school, we have open house coming up. Can you whip together something for the bulletin board to make it look real great? Can you put some kids work up? And that's when we get asks. We don't necessarily get asked to weigh in on like, on something in terms of, like, the reading curriculum or the math curriculum, even though I think it's so important that, like, art teachers just know the kids better, I think, oftentimes than, or not the kids necessarily, but, like, know the whole school, because we'll see more of the kids than,
Yeah.
especially at the elementary level, like, they'll see, like, one grade level, right? Or, in the middle school and upper school, like, they'll see one group of kids. I teach across all the grades. And so, like, we have this other perspective, this larger perspective that I don't think gets valued. Um, anyway, so but we get asked these very time intensive things that are very aesthetically based, and that's sort of where our value is placed, right? That's what people
Mm-hmm.
are good for. And so in my article, I'm going to be talking about, or I talked about, that's great and it's important to do that, but you need to also lay down some boundaries for people around, being really clear and transparent, and letting them know, like, you know, uh, ahead of time, like, if you talk to me an hour before, it's gonna be really tough for me to help you out with this.
Yeah.
If you talk to me like a couple weeks before, I'm probably going to be able to do it, and I probably will be excited to do it. But how do you start having those conversations and laying some of those boundaries down sooner than later, so that people can understand? And I don't think that they're ever necessarily knowingly trying to take advantage of an art teacher, but that assumption, and that, like, by being clear with your expectations, you kind of get to head that off. You're proactive around it, and so I think you make your own life easier then.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think that's some really good advice. So if you guys haven't read that article, I'm going to encourage you to go check that out. One last question, just kind of big picture view, what can we expect from you in the future? Like, what do you have coming later this month, and maybe what do you have coming over the next few months? What ideas are you passionate about, and what are you going to be writing about in the near future here?
There's actually a range of stuff that I'm considering. I like to kind of look back and think about, like, how I've had such a varied career. I think my route to being a classroom art teacher is really different than a lot of other folks. So I'll be looking at some other careers outside of the classroom, or opportunities, how you can kind of, connect maybe, or do some work that's in addition to maybe just the classroom teaching. I've worked a lot with teens, so I've started a couple different teen programs. Those happen primarily in Chicago. I've worked with some teen groups here in Seattle, and so I don't think anyone can say they understand teens, but I think I've got a good handle on different approaches and ways. So one of my upcoming articles will be around offering some tips with working with teens. I'll also be thinking about how art teachers can better connect with the creative community that's around them. I think that's so important, that, like, we as art teachers can oftentimes end up, like, sort of in our classroom and sort of stuck there almost, like we're working so hard in the classroom that you forget that there's this amazing creative community that's out there. And whether that's, if you're in an urban environment, or like in a city, there's tons of resources. But whether you're in a rural environment too, there are lots of creative folks out there who, it's great if you're able to get out and work with them, whether that's as an artist, or, as an educator, or bringing them into your classroom. Like, there are just so many ways to connect. And so I think that helps, it's important to keep restoring ourselves, I think, in that way, with that creativity that's outside of our classroom, because our kids are great, but also, working with the students day to day, like, it's a grind sometimes, especially when you hit, I think, sometimes this point of year, as you're right smack in the middle of the school year, and every art teacher feels that, like, I'm just trying to get to the next break, or every teacher, right? Like, you're just trying to like get through things. It's hard, it's a grind, but if you've got some of those outside connections, that helps, I think, restore you and fuels you through the year.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And I think that's a lot of good stuff to look forward to. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. But Ray, thank you very much for coming on. It was awesome to hear from you. And I really appreciate you making some time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was great talking with you too. Thanks so much.
That conversation went a little long, but I think there was just so much great advice that Ray had there. I really love what he said about reflection and about creativity and teaching kids to appreciate the art making process. And I really want you to take a look at his article from yesterday. It is spectacular, about how we aren't just here to make posters and bulletin boards. Ray has so many great things to say. This was an awesome conversation, and it might actually be an episode that's worth listening to twice. And if nothing else, we'll have to have Ray back on again. I think I will leave you with one of my favorite things that he said in this episode. It's about creating a space where kids are comfortable, where kids can experiment. We give them opportunities to try things. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. And that one quote doesn't encapsulate everything that we talked about today or everything that we covered, but it's a great thought to leave you with. If things don't work out every time, that's okay. Art Ed Radio is produced by The Art of Education with audio engineering from Michael Crocker. Remember that you can sign up for our email list at artedradio.com. And one last thing, if you haven't done so yet, please go sign up for your 30-day free trial of Pro at theartofed.com/pro. It is spectacular professional development, and I really can't tell you how great it is. It's something you need to see for yourself if you have not done so already. So again, go check out Art Ed Pro at theartofed.com/pro. Thanks for listening.